The human meat market of old Europe, when cannibalism was medicine. Imagine waking up in a 17th century European city. You're feeling unwell, so you visit the local apothecary. The shopkeeper offers you a remedy, a powder made from ground human skull, or perhaps a tincture of human fat. Would you drink it?
Because for centuries, thousands of Europeans did exactly that.
You don't learn this in history class, but cannibalism wasn't just practiced by isolated tribes in remote jungles. It was systematized, commercialized, and practiced by the elite across Europe for hundreds of years under a respectable medical guise called medicinal cannibalism. From the 1500s until the early 1900s, Europeans from all social classes regularly consumed human body parts as medicine. Physicians prescribed human blood, fat, bone, brain, skin, and organs to treat everything from epilepsy to bruising. This wasn't primitive folk medicine, it was mainstream healthcare, endorsed by the most respected doctors of the Renaissance and Enlightenment. King Charles II of England had his own personal recipe called the King's Drops, a tincture made by mixing human skull fragments with alcohol. He paid £6,000 for the recipe, equivalent to over $1 million today. The most sought-after skulls came from young, healthy Irishmen who had died violently, preferably executed criminals whose bodies were never buried in soil. But where did all these human body parts come from? The demand created a horrifying supply chain. Egyptian mummies were imported by the shipload and ground into powder called mumia. So high was the demand that fake mummies were manufactured to meet it. When an authentic 3,000-year-old pharaoh was unwrapped, instead of being studied, it was immediately cut into pieces and sold to apothecaries. Yet the true horror begins with the realization that many medicines came from much fresher sources. Public executions weren't just entertainment. They were medical harvesting events. Crowds would gather around the scaffold with cups to catch and drink the still warm blood of executed criminals, believing it could cure epilepsy. Executioners made extra income by selling body parts to doctors and apothecaries, who would process them into medical preparations. In Germany, executioners themselves often became respected medical practitioners because they had privileged access to human body parts. Some even had special arrangements with authorities to receive bodies specifically for medical use. Court documents from 1679 Bavaria describe how an executioner named Wolf obtained permission to extract fat from a criminal's body, which was then used to treat nerve pain in wealthy patients. At medical schools across Europe, anatomy demonstrations often ended with professors directing students to collect blood and tissue for medicine. Human fat was particularly valued for treating joint pain and rheumatism. One popular German text from 1603 provided precise instructions for rendering human fat, noting that it should be taken from young men who have died by violence and preferably by the wheel. The wheel was a torture device where victims had their limbs broken before being woven through the spokes of a large wheel and left to die slowly over days. Medical texts specifically recommended fat from these torture victims because their prolonged suffering was thought to enhance the medicinal qualities of their tissues. Perhaps most disturbing were the practices involving children. The fat of young children was considered especially potent, and there were documented cases of children's bodies being stolen from graves for medical use. In 1747, the British Royal Society published research on the medical applications of human skull, recommending powder made from the skulls of children who had died violent deaths. But the horror doesn't stop with the dead. Many remedies call for the use of body parts taken from living humans. Cranial moss, the fungus-like growth found on the skulls of unburied corpses, was harvested from execution grounds and battlefields. Human skin taken from the living was prescribed for skin conditions. There are accounts of executioners allowing wealthy patrons to purchase strips of skin flayed from the backs of criminals before execution. The industry surrounding medicinal cannibalism was vast and profitable. By the 1600s, human body parts were openly listed in pharmaceutical catalogs. The 1661 Pharmacopoeia Londinensis, London's official pharmaceutical guidebook, included recipes for medicines made from human skulls, fat, and blood. These weren't black market products. They were mainstream medicines sold openly in respected establishments. What's more shocking is how recently this continued. While the practice declined in the 18th century, it persisted in remote areas well into the 19th century. In 1909, a German pharmaceutical catalog still listed Essentia craniae humani, essence of human skull, among its available products. The devastating twist? These remedies were completely ineffective. Thousands of people were consumed for absolutely no medical benefit. The entire practice was built on pseudoscience and superstition, dressed up as sophisticated medicine. The doctors prescribing these remedies were the respected scientists of their day. This widespread acceptance of medicinal cannibalism reflects a disturbing psychological compartmentalization. The same European societies that condemned cannibalism as practiced by indigenous peoples around the world had simply reframed their own consumption of human flesh as medicine, allowing them to engage in the same behavior while maintaining a sense of moral superiority. In fact, when European explorers encountered cannibalistic practices in South America and the Pacific, they often described these customs in horrified detail, while carrying medicine made from human body parts in their own medical kits. Many European accounts of indigenous cannibalism were exaggerated or fabricated entirely, creating a false narrative about savage peoples that justified colonization. The most profound element of this historical horror is how it was hidden in plain sight through language and social constructs. By calling it medicine rather than cannibalism, European society created a psychological distance that allowed people to consume human remains without considering the moral implications. The Latin names in medical texts, cranium hominis, exunga hominis, human fat, sanguis hominis, human blood, further obscured the reality of what was being prescribed. This medicinal cannibalism has left lasting impacts on our modern world. It influenced the development of medical ethics as the growing revulsion toward these practices in the 18th century coincided with the first formal medical ethics codes. It contributed to the establishment of laws governing the treatment of human remains and informed consent for medical procedures. But perhaps most significantly, it demonstrates how easily societies can normalize abhorrent behaviors when they're framed within acceptable cultural contexts. The physicians who prescribed human body parts weren't deviants. They were respected medical professionals following the scientific consensus of their time. The next time you visit a modern pharmacy with its sterile bottles of scientifically tested medications, remember that just a few generations ago, your ancestors might have been treating their ailments with tinctures made from human remains. The line between civilization and barbarism has always been thinner than we care to admit. And while we might look back with horror at these practices, we should ask ourselves what accepted practices in our own society might future generations regard with equal revulsion. The history of medicinal cannibalism doesn't just reveal the brutality of our past, it forces us to question the blind spots in our present.